I more or less came out with a theory of everything, which is a very strange thing to say. And I sort of would like to not say it in those terms, but I think the most interesting thing is that it doesn't engender any kind of response that you would imagine, even really the sort of hardcore scientific perspective from within the academy. The UFO story nothing lands. And so in a certain sense, I think what you have to do is you just have to assume that your eyes are correct, your brain is correct, and that the outside world has gone mad. Somehow it's mediated by our phones. And the fact that all of our institutions are consistent with a hijacking. I'm not saying that they have been hijacked. In fact, my theory of embedded growth obligations is that everything is not functioning because of a common ideology, which is that the U.S. had a secret vulnerability. So the exhaust port on the U.S. Death Star was that low growth had never really been experienced, and that we don't have a plan for low growth.
Huh. So everything from the 70s on, really.
Yeah, probably even a little bit earlier than that. And then, I also think that until and this is a very unpopular point of view, because in general, you're either pro-institution or you're burn it all down. And I'm neither. My feeling is re-inflict heterodoxy within our institutions and you'll save everything. Fail to re-inflict heterodoxy. If you don't have a Noam Chomsky at MIT can't function.
So let's tease that out, actually, because I think that's very important. I think I get accused a lot of like, oh, you're just very critical, like anarchist, like all you want to do is tear down institutions.
Sorry, nobody's calling you an anarchist.
Well, I've heard it before. I mean, like, why are you doing, why are you criticizing Fauci or something like that?
For God's sakes. I mean, because Fauci is ridiculous. I mean,
well, yeah, thank you.
No, but I'm saying, look, meanwhile, in adult space,
yes,
that's not what's happening. It's
that's
just
fair.
In fake adult space, I know what you're talking about.
That's a fair point. And I think, though, this is what I want to underscore for a lot of people, which is that you said you neither want to tear down institutions or defend them in their current form. Right. What is the end state? So I've said before, it's not that I'm anti-elite, it's that I think we need a better elite. I'm not sure if that's necessarily something you would agree with.
No, we need an elite.
Okay, go ahead. So expand on that. What do you mean by that?
We need an elite. If my child needs surgery, I'm going to go find an elite surgeon. If my child is kidnapped, I'm going to find elite commandos. Why am I not entitled to elite scientists, elite medical people, elite politicians, elite strategists, elite media? No. We're dying from a lack of elite, and the reason that we all are anti-elitist is because the elite aren't. I don't know who these people are. Mm-hmm. I can see them in their chairs. It's sort of like, if a crazy person sits down on a throne, okay, so now you've got a crazy person sitting on a throne. Well, there are various important chairs that people are supposed to sit in, chaired professorships historically. And by getting us all to hate the concept of an elite, it certainly serves the interests of people that I really wish were more frustrated in life.
I have a question to what you said earlier, your point about you need Noam Chomsky, the famously leftist linguistics professor in MIT's. Why, and this isn't my view, but this is something that's going to come to mind of a lot of audience members. Why do we need MITs? We have Noam Chomsky's. Noam Chomsky, if he were young, could have a huge YouTube channel, a huge podcast. Why do you think we need an MIT in the first place?
I don't know. I was at MIT. There were a lot of really important people and really important things that got done there. And so why do you need institutions? I mean, that's a very millennial Gen Z perspective. And
it's one, though, that I think a lot of the audience is going to ask, right?
Well, of course, because you've never seen an institution function. If you've never seen an institution, I mean, look, I only saw functional institutions when I was a young person. I certainly don't see them now. And so, of course, we're embittered. But, look, I keep hearing things like, every organization can't function and nobody can keep a secret. Well, how did the Manhattan Project happen? How did we invade the beaches of Normandy? Come on. This idea that you're going to have an app for invading, there's an app for that. No, there isn't an app. You need an institution. You need an army. You need scientists, you need laboratories, you need brick and mortar. Human beings can't just decamp to the internet. We're not all going to be able to upload in Silicon or reboot from tardigrades. This is ridiculous. Human society requires institutions. And right now, because of a concept that I don't think people have really discussed, Jennifer Fried, a psychologist at the University of Oregon, has an amazing theory called institutional betrayal. The idea being that when an institution is charged with caring for us and it betrays us, we experience a type of trauma that we do not see elsewhere. The betrayal by those charged with caring for those who cannot care for themselves directly, like a surgeon in an operating room, causes something terrible to happen. And I've only slightly improved it, which is the concept of universal institutional betrayal. No one has a concept of that. And that's the whole idea behind the embedded growth obligations. I don't want to have to explain why TJ Maxx and Yale are having the same problems. In general, what's going on is that we have this concept of an embedded growth obligation. Everything has to grow or it goes crazy because it becomes a Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. And so we were used to this. We didn't have a plan B. And now we've got universal institutional betrayal because every institution has to be headed by somebody who's comfortable with the idea that they're going to be running a Ponzi scheme if they can't make growth happen. There are very few institutions that are continuing to grow endogenously and organically at a real level.
Quick thing then. Well, sorry, I just want to get a direct, because this actually ties back to our episode of Eric Torenberg where he was talking about higher education. Yale was and is an institution, by its very definition, does not grow. There are a limited number of seats. That's how you maintain credentialism. That's how you maintain the almost nightclub aspect of elite higher education. So I'm just curious, can you expand your idea of growth to other aspects of American society beyond just TJ Maxx? Because I get that one there. I know the shareholders have expectations there, but let's expand it a little bit.
Well, I mean, the typical one is, the university system really did grow. And the key issue would be that the elite institutions, the Harvards, the Princetons, unfortunately, Yale sort of stumbled because they didn't understand the importance of the STEM stuff and they invested in the wrong place. But let's take Princeton, MIT, Berkeley, let's say. They would typically train people who would then go down into the rest of the system. So the top departments would populate the second and third tier departments. And then the second and third tier departments would need to get work done. And so when you need assistants that you can't afford to hire on the open market, what you do is you promise them a future. And as long as the institute, because we went from educating sub 10% of the population to approximately half of the population post-secondary level, there was a long period of expansion. So I'm going to disagree slightly that the system did expand. And, we had a free labor thing. And so when the bill came due, you were supposed to hire people because your students were never students. They were your workforce. They were trained professionals and they were getting even more training, but mostly what they were doing was sacrificing their youth for the promise, and wait for it, of academic freedom. The big benefit of being in the university system is that you had a middle class to upper middle class lifestyle with the intellectual freedom of a billionaire. And when you throw away the intellectual freedom of a billionaire, you stop being able to select for the people who you need in your research enterprise. And because nobody seems to have intellectual freedom almost except for us, we've got a real problem.
So here's the question there, but this is the trade-off, right? Which is that, yes, we may have intellectual freedom, but we don't necessarily maintain those formerly mainstream credentials. And so the difficulty, I just did a crossover episode with Joe Rogan, which will be available, I guess when this airs, it'll be fully available on the Breaking Points YouTube channel. And I asked him this question. I was like, to me, I think the craziest thing in the world is that millions of people listen to this podcast, and yet the institutional awareness of it at the highest echelons of American power seem non-existent to zero, as in some of these people are vaguely aware that Rogan exists, or they just pretend that he doesn't exist at all.
More B.
Okay, so B is the thing, but then there's just this silence like around maybe us. Like my show gets a lot more viewers than CNN, but I'm not stupid. CNN has way more of an impact on the day-to-day policy process. So what's the trade-off there?
Because your audience is people. Their audience is institutions.
So how do we change that? What's the road to changing that?
We've got to take our first institution back. And I kind of hoped it was going to be the University of Chicago, and then it sort of ended up as Trader Joe's, who refused to capitulate, which is very confusing. I think it's important that we go back to the University of Chicago. And one of the really crazy questions is, why can't we have one institution that flips the bird to all of the people who are drinking out of juice boxes in the elite chairs? I don't understand why no billionaire is at all interested in endowing anything that is insulated from the market in order to keep sense making alive. And the key thing is that you have to appreciate that the business model of the gated institutional narrative, or GIN as I've called it, is in part to talk their book by negging everything that occurs outside of it. So in other words, you were a smart guy when you were inside the GIN, but now you're an anarchist.
Right. Yeah. Crazy. What's he talking about? Right.
But this is the issue is I have to stand up for you, because otherwise you sound like you're special pleading. You sound like, oh, I don't have the influence of the CNN, or then you're bragging. Well, I have the greater reach. This is why, and Marshall, forgive me for 1 second, but this is why Rising was so important to me, because you guys had stumbled on a formula that nobody really understood. Dave Rubin had actually stumbled on the same formula. The optics, in some sense, of the mainstream with the soul of a pirate. That's the formula that matters. If the ability to speak with reasonable diction to, and this is why I'm complaining about the jackets. And you guys, you'll notice I almost always, even in Austin, my friends, I appear with a jacket. And the idea being that somehow the brain has a question: why am I not seeing the ante that we expect of an adult? The well-tied scarf, the decent professional lighting, all of that nonsense speaks to the amygdala, or some lower portion of the brain, that it is listening to something that is adult in nature. And for whatever reason, we have this complete division between a narrative that makes no sense but is listened to by institutions, and then this diversifying element, which is heterodox people who can finish complete sentences, appear to be reasonably well-informed, possess credentials, who are absolutely not listened to or are universally denigrated as part of a business model of keeping the guild closed. That's where we are.